I knew this day would come eventually. The day where I approach the monstrosity that is the Star Wars fandom. Like a lone soldier wielding a wooden spoon against an army of angry space nerds faced with the inevitability of my impending doom. This sequel trilogy is the hill that many Star Wars fans are prepared to die on one way or another. If you hate the movies, you're a tasteless imbecile. But if you love these movies, you're also a tasteless imbecile. No one ever wins in these heated debates based on subjective thoughts. Nothing is gained by hating on someone else's opinion of a film. So with that in mind, I'm sure nothing bad will happen as we move forward with this video. So, yeah, Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, released in December 2019, and the conclusion of the 9-episode-long Skywalker saga. If you'd like to skip the plot overview and get right into my spoiler-free thoughts on this movie, you can skip to this timestamp in the video. So with that said, let's prepare for battle and get right into it. The movie begins with the typical Star Wars text crawl saying Emperor Palpatine is somehow alive? How is he alive after Vader supposedly killed him in Return of the Jedi? You know, when he was tossed down a gaping shaft and literally exploded? Who knows? Not even the writers apparently, because they don't explain that shit at all. He's just fucking there. I feel so bad for the fans who went into this movie without watching any trailers or spoilers of any kind, and I know there were plenty. This revelation done in this particular manner must have been so disappointing. Kylo Ren is tearing through a planet in a very visually impressive sequence to obtain this Sith Wayfinder device that leads him to another planet where he finds the decrepit but still alive Emperor Palpatine. He tells Kylo Ren that he's been behind the scenes, scheming and created Snoke as a puppet to control the First Order the entire time. Not like he trained Snoke and was his mentor or something. He shows off giant test tubes with other Snoke clones, because I guess that's a thing now, where you can just manufacture a powerful Force user and drop them right into the highest seat of authority for the evil space army. I don't have the slightest idea why he even has more, since Snoke was killed, so making more seems entirely pointless. Like, what was his thought process here? Release more Snoke clones into the galaxy and assume no one will question why this dead guy is miraculously still alive? Oh. Anyway, Kylo is about to kill the Emperor to remove the last threat to his position as Supreme Leader, but Palpatine is like, nah fam, how about instead, I'll just put you in charge and we'll work together and rename the First Order into the Final Order. And he raises an army of like thousands of Star Destroyers through the ground that he just had lying around apparently. And he also tells Kylo to go kill Rey, who is actually getting some damn Jedi training for once under the guidance of Leia. In the midst of her Jedi training, Rey has apparently learned to float in midair, which, okay, that's cool, but is this very useful skill ever going to be used again, even when the fate of the galaxy depends on getting across large spaces very quickly? No, of course not! It's never seen or mentioned again! Finn, Poe, and Chewbacca are also meeting with someone to receive data from an informant within the First Order. They have to take this giant cable and plug it into R2-D2, but the information is literally just, hey, Palpatine is alive, on this planet, has a massive fleet of Star Destroyers, and he's attacking soon. That's it. That's all it is. They really could have just shouted that to each other, but nah, gotta go through this whole rigmarole and risk getting blown up so we can have this big car chase in space. And Poe can do this fancy, never-before-seen light-speed jumping thing. Yeah, we're just a few minutes into this and the plot is already kind of a mess. Through Luke's notes, Rey finds information about a second Sith Wayfinder, because of course one exists, that can lead them to Palpatine. So the gang take BB-8 and C-3PO on the Millennium Falcon to go find it. I wonder if Luke had notes on where the most evil person in the entire galaxy that everyone assumed was dead is residing before or after he banished himself into exile. And why do these Wayfinders exist? This is literally the key to your demise, Palpatine, if the Resistance gets a hold of it. Maybe destroy them, or at least keep them close to you? On the planet Pasana, Rey, Finn, Poe, and Chewbacca, who we're just now seeing all together on an adventure for the first time at the final film of a trilogy, arrive with no plan other than search an entire goddamn desert planet for this one tiny clue that Luke never even found. But coincidentally, there's an ongoing festival that only occurs once every 40 years, and of course our heroes would just happen to arrive on this special day. One of the festival goers gives Rey a beaded necklace, which Kylo is able to snatch off of her through their Force connection and analyze the beads to track where she is. The group finds Lando Calrissian, who tells them of the Wayfinder's suspected location just before the First Order arrives, attempting to hunt them down. The gang is able to kill all the stormtroopers, but manages to conveniently crash their skimmer right on top of the one pit of quicksand for miles around, which is suspended above a series of caves, because that's how quicksand works. Even though Rey is very capable of floating off the ground and lifting heavy objects, she does nothing and they sink. In the cave, they find the body of an assassin named Ochi with a dagger etched with Sith text that none of them can read except C-3PO, whose programming forbids him from translating it. They also find a giant injured worm thing that Rey heals with Force healing, which has never been done before by anyone ever throughout the Star Wars media as far as I know. But somehow Rey knows she's capable of this, even though it's never shown how and when she discovers this, or how and why she can do this in the first place. But that doesn't matter, because the worm helps them to escape the cave. They go to Ochi's abandoned ship that, by some miracle, hasn't been stripped for parts, or stolen, or broken down to the point of no longer functioning. It's just sitting on this hill, probably for decades. But Rey seems to recognize the ship. Before they can leave, Rey, sensing Kylo is nearby, decides to just walk off from her friends for some reason without a word, even though they're about to leave at that exact moment. She wants to go confront him, I guess, and destroys his ship, making it explode with him inside, but clearly a person literally exploding means nothing in this series, so he's completely fine and walks away unscathed. Though thanks to her, Chewbacca, who was carrying the dagger, gets captured by the First Order when he tries to go after her. Rey didn't even walk that far from the ship, but when Chewie had to go get her, somehow he was captured without any gunfire or fighting whatsoever, and neither Poe, Finn, Rey, or BB-8 noticed. And the First Order didn't even go after anyone else, even though they were within spitting distance. A transport ship he is presumably on is taking off, and Rey and Kylo Ren have a sort of tug-of-war with it using the Force until Rey accidentally unleashes some lightning onto the ship and destroys it, believing she's killed Chewie, and the group escapes on the assassin ship. On the Star Destroyer, the stormtroopers report that they had many casualties on Pasaana, but they acquired a hostage, which turns out to be Chewie, who is actually alive. Though not by some daring escape or anything like that, just a dumb mix-up on Finn's part. It's basically like that game where you put a ball in one of 3 cups and then shuffle the cups around. I guess Finn sucks at object permanence, which allows this sort of contrived switcheroo to happen. So now the group needs to get the translation of the dagger text from C-3PO's memory, so they go to Kijimi, a planet that Poe is familiar with because apparently he used to be some sort of drug smuggler or something. As if that really matters now this far into the trilogy. They find Zori, a former lady friend of Poe's, and she is initially going to turn in our heroes for the bounty until Rey beats her up and she suddenly changes her mind, so she takes them to a droid smith named Babu Frick, who is one of my favorite characters of this whole trilogy. But digging up the translation from C-3PO's memory, which turns out to be coordinates, will cause a complete memory wipe. And they opt for that, rather than just have him point to a freaking star map, or have the Sith droid they found on Ochi's ship translate it, or anything else that would make far more sense. C-3PO refuses at first, but allows it, knowing that otherwise everything they've done up until now, including Chewbacca's assumed death, would have been for nothing. It's meant to be a sad scene because he's essentially dying in a sense, surrounded by his friends, but he doesn't know these people and barely had any screen time with them whatsoever. His actual friends, Han Solo, Leia, Chewie, Luke, and R2-D2 aren't there because half of them are dead, and the other half is just somewhere else. As they're readying to leave, as the First Order arrives once again, Rey senses Chewbacca alive on a nearby ship, yet couldn't sense him alive when they were on Pasaana, and she was much closer to him at that point in time than she is now, but okay, sure. Which also begs the question, who was actually on that ship that got blown up? Were there prisoners on it that were horrifically murdered by Rey that we're just never going to acknowledge? Because apparently we don't know, so I guess we don't care, and the group sets out on a rescue mission. Zori gives them a First Order Captain's Medallion to allow them to get past any blockade and board the ship, which she had acquired with the intention of leaving the planet and escaping the reach of the First Order. And wait, hold on. Where did she get this medallion from? Who did she get it from? Wouldn't the captain who originally owned it have noticed it's gone and have it deactivated or something? These are questions we never get answered because at this point, I'm sure the writers don't even know. With Kylo Ren on the ground of Kijimi searching for Rey, the gang infiltrates the ship with the space coin thing, and they just bust into the hangar, guns a-blazing, which somehow doesn't sound every alarm on the damn ship. They rescue Chewie, but as they're heading to escape, Rey separates from Finn and Poe again to search for the dagger. When she does find it, Kylo Ren communicates to her through their connection once more and tells her that she is Palpatine's granddaughter, which raises far more questions than it answers, mainly who the hell fucked Palpatine to make a baby? This is not a mental image I ever wanted in my head, and now it's there forever. Thanks, I hate it. And Palpatine's son definitely isn't older than maybe mid-30s when we see him in flashbacks, so Palpatine was absolutely all melty-faced when he got with Mrs. Palpatine, and the fact that Palpatine even had a biological son who grew up completely normal seems to be a huge feat in itself. This is definitely a twist that wasn't thoroughly thought out, especially after Kylo said specifically in The Last Jedi that her parents are nobodies. Oh, he technically didn't lie because they were nobodies, but she's the granddaughter of Palpatine. That makes one of her parents the child of Palpatine. That means they're not a nobody. Worst of all, now this means everything Rey is and has done is no longer special. All that's happened to her is because she is a Palpatine, and it essentially becomes her entire character for the rest of the movie. So Kylo Ren goes on to tell her that Ochi was sent to find Rey when she was a child, and he killed her parents after they'd left her on Jakku to hide her, saying they sold her for drinking money to protect her. Like, yeah, we have to protect our daughter, but money will definitely change hands. We're gonna haggle the price and spend that money on space liquor. Rey has a vision of her parents being interrogated by Ochi after they sold her, and her mom says, word for word, she isn't on Jakku, which I guess is good enough for the professional evil assassin because he wasn't even suspicious enough to follow up on this claim. Which also has me wondering how Rey even recognized his ship to begin with, because clearly he never found Rey. So how would she know what his ship looks like? And why couldn't the parents stay with her and hide out somewhere on Jakku? Or at least one of them? Or leave her on the doorstep of someone who isn't a mercenary and junk dealer that gives this child a miserable existence? Or at the bare minimum, someone who hasn't seen their faces and would sell them out in an instant at the first threat or bribe that came their way if someone actually did go looking for Rey on Jakku. This is the finale to a saga that has spanned multiple generations and 9 movies. And this is what we get. Oh my god. Rey and Kylo have a weird psychic vision type battle through their force connection. It's a bit weird with Rey appearing where Kylo is and him appearing where she is, but for some reason he can't figure out exactly where she is until she hits a pedestal holding the melted helmet of Darth Vader, and Kylo sees it, realizing she is on his Star Destroyer. Even though he definitely should have realized where she was much sooner than that, because she was already holding the dagger in her hand that he had left literally within arm's reach of the helmet. And it's just there. It's in her hand throughout their entire conversation and fight. He sees it in her hand and should remember where he put it, but for some reason doesn't make that connection. He offers once again for Rey to join him so they can kill Palpatine and rule over the galaxy together. Meanwhile, Finn, Poe, and Chewbacca are trying to make their way back to the Millennium Falcon, but are caught, though they are saved by General Hux. Turns out he is the spy, not siding with the Resistance, but just not wanting Kylo Ren to win. I mean, come on, dude. You were literally Space Hitler 2 movies ago. Now you've been reduced to a whiny little bitch baby. His hate for Kylo is the only driving factor for him to betray his own organization, potentially causing them to lose to the Resistance and risking his own life because he doesn't like Kylo Ren. This is why you don't make your villains into a joke. They're not intimidating, and the tone goes all over the place. So everyone is able to escape on the Millennium Falcon and not be followed, because who really knows? This happens often where the First Order painstakingly tracks down the heroes just to let them fly off without much incident once they manage to escape. And the other First Order guy, whose name I genuinely cannot be bothered to remember at this point, kills General Hux because he's not stupid and realizes that this asshat is a traitor. They also blow up Kijimi just because they felt like it, apparently. I guess the only plan of the Final Order was to blow up all the planets so they have literally no one to rule over. Seems completely logical. But the main takeaway here is we are supposed to assume Zori is dead. Then the gang goes to the planet where the coordinates sent them. Well, I should say they crash, but this damn ship has plot armor stronger than some of these characters, I swear. And they meet another stormtrooper deserter like Finn named Janna, and she leads them to the remains of the second Death Star that miraculously ended up here after being blown to bits. And even still had huge pieces still intact after that massive explosion, but I think we've learned at this point that being engulfed in a massive ball of fire doesn't mean anything anymore. Rey takes one look at the ruins and realizes that she needs to line up the outline of the dagger with the wreckage of the Death Star to find where the Wayfinder is located inside. And they just so happen to be standing at the exact correct coast, on the exact correct beach, at the exact correct angle to match up the knife with the wreckage that conveniently hasn't deteriorated over the time by the constant waves. It's sheer insanity. I'm losing my mind here. This is literally just so baffling. The amount of convenience and pure dumb luck that drives this movie. If they landed any further to one side, they could have spent hours on this fucking thing, but nope, got it figured out within less than a minute. This is totally okay. I'm fine. This is fine. Rey sets off on her own towards the wreckage and finds the Wayfinder and sees a vision of herself as a Sith Lord and freaks out. Probably because evil Rey's teeth shapeshift from normal to these pointy, sharp, fang-like teeth. And I just don't get what's happening anymore, even for a hallucination or whatever this is. It's fucking weird. Like, why are decisions like this being made and approved? Then Kylo Ren arrives, somehow finding her in this massive wreckage that apparently takes a special knife to pinpoint the exact location, and he's able to find her easily. And I am not accepting, oh, cause they're in a dyad, as an answer. That was never an option before when he was trying to find her, so it shouldn't be now. Anyway, he destroys the Wayfinder and asks her once again to join him, and she refuses. Then the two duel on top of the ruins. Then something really weird happens. Leia, who is still on the planet they started on at the beginning of the movie, channels Kylo Ren since she is his mother, which distracts him, and Rey stabs him with his own lightsaber, but it ends up actually killing Leia, and Rey senses it and realizes she's fucked up, so she heals Kylo Ren with her Force healing thing and leaves on his ship? I get they needed a way to kill off Leia, but this is just a little too strange. There's a lot of different ways people have interpreted this scene, but that's what it seemed like to me, and after that, Carrie Fisher's body double is lying dead, covered by a sheet in the background for the rest of the movie, and it's really just... it's not great. It's so unfortunate they went to such lengths to have Leia in this movie just to kill her off in a really dumb way that no one could agree on what actually happened or why when they first saw it. So Kylo Ren, having just been saved by his enemy, starts questioning his life choices when he has a vision of his dead father, Han Solo. They have the same conversation that took place just before he killed his father in The Force Awakens, but this time it takes on a whole new meaning. So he tosses his lightsaber into the ocean and reclaims his identity as Ben Solo. Though it must not be that big of a deal, because after this, he doesn't have a single speaking line. Like, cool, you've come full circle and joined the good side, but you're not gonna talk anymore. fan-fucking-tastic. Meanwhile, Rey has exiled herself to the same planet Luke was hiding out at, burning the ship that she stole from Kylo Ren turned Ben Solo. She's about to toss Luke's lightsaber into the fire, but his ghost appears and catches it, instead of it just phasing through him because he's a ghost and it landing in the fire. But put a pin in that, because we'll come back to that in just a second. He tells her a Jedi's weapon deserves more respect after he had immediately tossed it over his shoulder upon it being returned to him in the last movie, and goes on to say Rey can't stay on this island like he did because it was a mistake. This feels like a big middle finger from J.J. Abrams to Rian Johnson, I swear. It's so petty, and I kind of love it, but it makes the movie suffer like a child caught in the middle between two divorcing parents. He encourages Rey to face Palpatine and also gives her Leia's lightsaber because apparently Leia was training to be a Jedi but stopped because she saw in a vision that her son would die at the end of her journey or something. So she wanted Luke to keep her lightsaber so someone could finish her journey, but wait, that means her son would still die. The end of her journey equals her son's death. This writing is so absurdly confounding, I can't deal with it. Luke then uses the Force to lift his old X-Wing from the water, so Rey has a ride to Exegol, and I have to say, as a ghost, Luke, and I assume other Jedi, can still hold a lightsaber and use the Force. So, why don't they help more? Don't expect them to help in the big finale against Palpatine, because of course that's not gonna happen, even though clearly they absolutely could and should. Rey takes the Wayfinder from Ben's burning ship and leaves for the planet Exegol, where Palpatine is located. After R2-D2 miraculously restores C-3PO's memory, the Resistance follows Rey's signal to join her at Exegol, and it's an enormous army of Star Destroyers versus a flimsy fleet of Resistance ships. You may assume the Resistance is doomed, which would make sense, but Poe has a plan that hinges solely on the ships being so large that the nav can't tell which way is up. Yes, that's an actual sentence. Those words truly fall right out of his face, and I so wish he would put that sentence back in his mouth. So I'm just going to ignore that for the sake of my sanity and move on. And the Final Order also won't have shields because shields can't be activated until they're above the atmosphere. I don't know if this has ever been a previously established thing, but given this movie's abhorrent track record thus far, I'm gonna hazard a guess and say no. And this was just clumsily written in to give the heroes some sort of fighting chance. Rey goes to confront Palpatine while her friends fight the Final Order outside. Palpatine says he didn't really want Ben to kill her, even though that's exactly what he told him to do, so would have been super awkward if he actually did it. And Snoke, who was literally Palpatine's puppet, was also actively trying to kill her. But Palpatine wants Rey to kill him, so his spirit transfers to her, and she becomes the new Empress of the Final Order. Or if she doesn't, her friends will die, as they're severely outnumbered and losing the fight outside, and she seems to agree. Before she can kill him, Ben arrives to help. No idea how he got here. Rey took his ship, and he's not with the Final Order anymore, so he couldn't catch a ride from them. He's approached by the Knights of Ren, and this should be an easy fight since Ben has a blaster and the Force, but the shot cuts away and back, and suddenly his blaster is now gone? So Rey connects with him through the Force again, and transfers one of her lightsabers to him, so he's able to fight through the guards and join Rey as Lando brings in more forces to fight the Star Destroyers. Thousands of ships suddenly arriving on Exegol, like everyone in the MCU assembling to fight Thanos in Endgame. It's just like that, including Zori and Babu Frick, who are somehow alive, despite forfeiting her only way off the planet and seemingly with no other feasible method of escape before it blew up. So many people just don't stay dead in this movie, and it's infuriating. Palpatine sees the connection Rey and Ben have, which for some reason is a surprise, even though he was a puppet master of Snoke throughout the entirety of The Last Jedi, and he knew and exploited that connection for his benefit. But okay, sure, we'll just keep rolling with this crazy train. So he completely abandons his plan to have his spirit take over Rey's body, so he drains their power to strengthen himself and tosses Ben off of a cliff. then shoots lightning at the Resistance fleet, causing many of the ships to explode, except for those with named people we're supposed to care about. Of course, we can't lose them, so their ships just suddenly lose power. Rey is weakened and calls to all the past Jedi who speak to her and urge her on, so she stands to face Palpatine again, who turns his lightning on her. She blocks it with one of the lightsabers. The same lightning that just incapacitated an entire fleet of ships is just blocked with a single lightsaber. And Palpatine tells her, "I am all the Sith." And Tony responds, "I am Iron Man." Oh no, wait, hold on, wrong movie. Rey says, "I am all the Jedi." Then Force pulls the other lightsaber to her, and with both Skywalker lightsabers, she deflects Palpatine's lightning back on him, killing them both. Ben climbs back up the cliff because, of course, getting thrown off a cliff in this franchise is just as much of a mere inconvenience as getting blown to bits. And now he can magically use Force healing after seeing Rey do it once, and he is able to bring her back to life so they can kiss, which is really awkward and forced, no pun intended, since there's never been any build towards a romantic dynamic between these two, and they spend far more time with Kylo torturing her and them fighting rather than making flirty eyes at each other. The romantic connection seems more for the sake of fan service. And also, I guess, even though Palpatine is dead, he's abandoned his whole possession thing because it doesn't happen, even though she did exactly what he wanted her to do. So it seems like for a moment, maybe this new couple will have a happy ending, but of course not, since Ben apparently transferred all of his life force to Rey, even though there's never been a cost to this force healing thing. Rey doesn't get hurt while healing the sandworm or Ben earlier, but I guess he has to give his life in order to save her, and he dies. And his body fades away. So I guess he's not allowed to stick around after death like she did. Rey isn't even sad, no grieving of any kind. She just looks confused, kind of like the rest of us. Leia's body also fades away, and the Resistance destroys the rest of Palpatine's forces. Honestly, I feel like a much better direction for this scene would have been when Rey was first facing Palpatine instead of instantly agreeing to go along with his plan when she realizes Ben is nearby and she raises her lightsaber. Rather than handing it off to Ben, she stabs herself instead to thwart Palpatine's plan. Then Ben Solo can defeat him himself and revive her with Force healing if they absolutely had to go with that direction. Throughout the sequel trilogy, Rey is concerned over her connection to the dark side and fears it could take over her, albeit rather haphazardly and inconsistently, so sacrificing herself to ensure the demise of the Sith would be the ultimate Jedi light side thing to do. And then Ben is still fully redeemed by saving Rey and giving his life for her, even though I still hate that. At least it would be better than this confounded sequence. After the Resistance celebration, Rey travels to Tatooine to bury the Skywalker lightsabers outside Luke's old home. Someone passing by says she hasn't seen anyone there in years and asks for her name. Rey sees the spirits of Luke and Leia and responds, "Rey Skywalker," identifying herself in the same family tree as the guy she just kissed, which is so weird. The ending shot is Rey standing alone on a desert planet, just like the one she fucking started on at the beginning of the trilogy, where she was miserable and stranded. Her friends aren't even there, and she has no clear direction. Once again, the main aspect of Rey's character is her lineage, even though it was established 2 movies ago in The Force Awakens that her lineage doesn't matter to her character, and she'll do just fine with influential people around her to mold and shape who she is. But then that changed in The Last Jedi too. It doesn't matter because her lineage doesn't include anyone important. And now the writers are still harping on Rey's goddamn lineage. We don't have any time to expand on her character, and in the end, these chucklefucks still fail to grasp that if we learn more about who she really is as a person and how she moves forward and develops throughout these movies, then who cares where she came from, because she'll still be important to us as the audience, but that doesn't happen. She is still an entirely undefined character by the end. Doesn't matter she gives herself the name Skywalker, because we don't get to find out what that means for her or where she goes from here. We've spent 3 movies focusing on her lineage, and every time in the end it amounts to nothing. Totally a happy and satisfying ending. Hooray? Question mark? I haven't reviewed any other Star Wars movies on my channel, though I did have plans in the past for The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi that didn't pan out at the time. But as beloved as Star Wars is, it's one of those franchises that had me really hesitant to delve into because there's so many conflicting opinions that people are so passionate about, which is sort of to be expected with a series that spans several decades and has multiple generations of fans. To give you an idea of where my mindset was going into The Rise of Skywalker, I had very conflicting opinions on the previous two movies as someone who was never a huge die-hard Star Wars fan, but can still very much enjoy and appreciate the high points in the franchise. I quite liked The Force Awakens. I thought it was a nice return to the franchise, and it's one of the few movies that I actually went to see again in theaters. But on the other hand, I had no love at all for The Last Jedi, and it left me feeling very disappointed. Especially the casino bit, which is single-handedly the worst group of scenes of the whole movie, and there was literally no point because they didn't succeed in anything here. Oh god, I hate it. It sucks. Kill it. Burn it with fire. It's so bad. Needless to say, I didn't have high hopes for this newest installment. I'm fully aware that the Star Wars fandom has very mixed feelings, not just on this movie, but as the sequel trilogy as a whole. The only consensus seems to be that there is none, and people can't really agree on how they feel about The Rise of Skywalker. I knew that going into this movie, and after seeing it, I can really understand why. We'll start with some positives. The action mostly was done pretty well. Some of the car chase in space scenes were still a little too chaotic for my liking, but the lightsaber battles were excellent, particularly ones between Rey and Kylo Ren. I like most of the comedy in the film, especially from C-3PO, surprisingly. Kind of ironic how a character that's meant to be irritating is one of the most enjoyable. It doesn't feel pushed or overdone, and I did actually laugh when I was supposed to a couple times. I love the character of Kylo Ren, or Ben Solo, whatever you want to call him. Adam Driver is spectacular, and all his scenes are done extraordinarily well. And his arc is probably the best out of everyone in these newer movies, which makes it all the more unfortunate when like 2/3 of the way through his story in this movie, he barely has any more speaking lines. Overall, I like a lot of the characters introduced in this sequel trilogy, and the cast did a wonderful job with what they were given, which for some isn't much. I feel like Finn had so much potential that went completely unused, and he didn't really do a lot in this movie. He mostly just spent the whole movie shouting Rey's name at her over and over again, which is unfortunate because he seemed to have a decent character arc until this movie. His story as a former stormtrooper is very slightly expanded with the addition of a certain character and gives more emphasis that not all stormtroopers are bad and some want to do good. But all this really succeeds in doing is makes it very disconcerting when he still chooses to immediately shoot every stormtrooper they come across, and at one point even giddily says woo, like he's having the best time of his fucking life. I also don't think Rey's character is nearly as developed as it could have been because her past and lineage was so secretive and really all over the place during the course of the trilogy that by the time we finally learn who this character is that we've been following for 3 freaking movies and what her deal is, it's basically almost over. They really try to push the whole Rey has a dark side thing in this movie, even though I figured that what little of that side plot existed in The Last Jedi was squashed when Kylo asked her to join and she said, nah thanks, I'm good. But it's particularly forced when early on in this movie she says she wants to kill Palpatine, the most evilly evil person in the entire galaxy, but that suddenly caused for alarm. But why? It's not like killing folks who are evil has ever been looked down on in this franchise. As a whole, the story isn't very cohesive. The pacing is horrible, nothing is ever explained, and there's still way too many questions left unanswered. World building is apparently not a concept that exists in this movie, and neither is giving new characters any sort of decent introduction. There's an excessive amount of coincidences based entirely on pure dumb luck, with so much depending on circumstances of everything happening at just the right place to just the right person at just the right time. If only one character's actions had been slightly different, like a festival necklace being given to someone else instead of Rey, or crashing anywhere but conveniently on top top of one tiny pit of quicksand for miles on a desert planet, or if they didn't manage to come across this person or that person by complete random happenstance, it would have thrown off the events of the whole film because the luck factor is the main driving element of the entire script. It becomes much more obvious watching this trilogy together that J.J. Abrams was trying to push the series in a certain direction with The Force Awakens, which admittedly he may have been too ambitious with his plans. Then Rian Johnson comes in for The Last Jedi and says, nah, fuck your direction, I'm going this way. And now J.J. Abrams attempts to veer back onto the initial course, but being the end of the trilogy, it's kinda too late for that. It's time to wrap things up. Especially regarding Palpatine's return, which is so baffling because it's entirely random. There's no mention of him at all in the previous two movies, no hints or anything, and it just suddenly comes out of nowhere. And it completely invalidates these new villains we've been building up until this point. But it gets even worse because much of J.J. Abrams' original vision of the film apparently had an extra 40 or so minutes but was changed due to studio interference from Disney. Of course, he was very likely in a bit of a bind once Rian Johnson didn't expand on what was started in The Force Awakens, but his version didn't leave so much out and create so many unanswered questions. Not only did the scene that explains how Palpatine is alive and why he is here get cut, a scene they had filmed with Samuel L. Jackson and Hayden Christensen with the past Jedi appearing to Rey as ghosts was completely scrapped. And we were even supposed to learn that secret thing Finn was going to tell Rey that was completely forgotten, and we never learned what he was going to say. He was going to tell Rey that he is Force sensitive. So he could have actually had a more complete story, but studio executives decided to cut it. It was also allegedly their decision to add that part I wasn't completely thrilled with between Rey and Kylo Ren, something Abrams didn't approve of because he wasn't interested in having characters make decisions they wouldn't normally just in order to pander to as many subsets of fans as possible. The original version likely wouldn't have been much better than what we were given, but it would have at least made a little more sense. For what we got, the plot moves around far too quickly. It goes by so fast, jumping from one event to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, that you almost have no time to process what's happening before moving on. The film tries to reel in the audience many times with nostalgia, and occasionally it works, but usually not as much. Which is a big part of why I think so many fans are disliking this movie, because they may feel it takes away from the previous films in the original trilogy that are so loved by revisiting certain aspects and tapping into that nostalgia by means of a movie that some may feel is inferior with an unsatisfying conclusion. And yes, before anyone gets on my case about this, I know that many questions and plot holes were addressed in the novels after the fact. But it should not be required to consume every ounce of media on Star Wars just for the story and a particular movie to make a little bit of sense. One of the biggest problems with The Last Jedi is that there was so much tragedy and death, but there's no beat or pause for the characters to process this or have any sort of emotional reaction. There aren't really any sort of consequences to the majority of the Resistance being wiped out because our main character survived, so woohoo, let's celebrate! This is sort of improved in The Rise of Skywalker just slightly, but the impactful moments are undone shortly afterwards. Like, we think a character is dead for a while, but then they somehow miraculously appear a bit later. So what is supposed to be these heavy moments lose all impact and emotional weight. Speaking of which, I understand they didn't have many options for Leia with the death of Carrie Fisher. I figured they would either write her off in some lame death off-screen in between films or try to CGI her in, but instead they ended up including her in Rise of Skywalker through unused footage from the previous two movies. Which honestly, while it is probably the best direction they could have gone with what's already been done and with respect to her, I still really don't like it. They had an out in The Last Jedi when she was flung into space. It wouldn't have been the most gracious and ceremonious death, but it would have made much more sense than her involvement in this movie. You can definitely tell the filmmakers had a lot of scenes prepared for her, but now someone else has to give her lines because, of course, she's not there to do it. Not even appearing as a ghost like some other characters can do, which is quite unfortunate, but again, nothing could really be done about that. If you like Star Wars, then maybe you will enjoy this movie. This is definitely a film with the longtime fans in mind, whether it actually works or not, which I honestly don't believe includes me in that demographic. The series is fascinating to me, but I didn't watch Star Wars when I was young. I didn't see any of the movies all the way through until about 6 years ago, so I don't have many personal feelings or emotional stake in this franchise. It is absolutely entertaining, and I enjoy many parts of it. Even The Rise of Skywalker has its moments. But not enough to look past the issues plaguing this newest movie and how jumbled the story gets. Though maybe that will be different for those who have spent more time with this franchise. Or maybe not, who knows? So with that said, I give Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker my personal rating of 4 out of 10. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, ideally without any threats on my life. That'd be nice. And if you have any suggestions for movies I should discuss and review in the future. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you have not already. And until next time, I will see you guys later. Bye!